Welcome to MMBDP 138. So if you go to the Canvas page and go to Files, you'll notice a tiny file called treecrap.ma, following my classic high-quality professional naming conventions. If you download this, it's just a very tiny file, and it has some of the things that we worked on yesterday. But I wanted to go backwards and try to regress towards a less complex version of modeling, because I think a lot of this was really, really complex, and you should have more familiarity with the basic tools and really brute force modeling before you get into things like parenting, like hierarchy, clean transformations. A lot of that stuff is, a rigger's job. So if you look at this file, there's 3 layers that I wanted to look at, which are trunk, branches, and foliage. And first we're going to talk about how to model these, because none of them are very difficult. Sorry, these were not on a layer. So this trunk object is a lot less complex than the ones I was showing in class, because here's all it is. I create a basic cylinder. I do some basic modification to its settings. I like to use 12, and I like subdivision caps off. I'm going to grab this top face, extrude it. That's fine. I don't care. We're not doing any curve things. That's a more complex way of doing things. There's nothing wrong with doing it this way. I'm then going to use edge loop subdivide. Right, that's what it's called in Blender. And insert edge loop tool. That's it. And I'll just click here, and you'll notice I have the number of edge loops set to 10, and that added a fair amount. I can adjust this later. So it's like the chunks we were using based on the curve, but a little less organic. But again, you don't necessarily need to jump into obtuse types of objects and parental hierarchies and order of selection hierarchies to make a simple tree. So now I'm just going to start scaling these and possibly turning on the brush tool so that my selection is a little more fluid. Again, you can hold B to extend it or contract it. You move it like this. And all I'm doing is trying to make this look a little organic. And have it maybe have a different profile in the side view versus the front view.
You're recording this, right?
Yes. So that's a much simpler tree, right? Or a much simpler chunk. We didn't have to do any parenting of an object to a curve. We don't have to maintain the hierarchy perfectly forever. So let's move to the branches layer now. This branch was created in the exact same way, but I'm setting it aside right now. It's a separate object. The foliage objects were not added in a layer when I uploaded it, but these are just 3 variations of things you might see for foliage. I think they're way too small right now. So what you might want to do is enlarge them. Freeze transformations. Think of this being like a large swath of, multiple leaves coming off of this. So something like that size. This is the simplistic version of it. Maybe something like that big. And this is more of like a weeping willow or possibly a weeping pine frond, where the weight of the stuff on it is really pulling it down. And you do have to think about this when you're looking at this. Again, like all things, you should always look to nature to figure out what you're looking at, rather than, YouTube tutorials. Go outside and look at a tree and think about how this geometry actually exists in the real world. You will notice that I do have one thing going here, which is all their origins right here, and that's because pixel-wise, that's where it's going to snap. I might make this a little more accurate in that we need this to intersect a tree eventually. So I might have this be actually more like that, so that when we snap in object mode, you'll notice that this little bit of polygons are going to intersect the trunk. Whatever. Makes sense, right? So let's try turning on multiple layers of this. So now, I might make 2 or 3 variations of this trunk, or this branch object. Here, I'll just do one really fast. And you'll notice that by starting with the default cylinder, and then editing it up, part of it is extruded down below here, so that we have something that will intersect with that trunk. Again, just being organic with it. That's good. So now we have 2 versions of this branch, right? We're not going to do any weird grouping things. We're trying to get the curve to match. That does have benefits because you do have a non-linear workflow then where you can modify the curves and update. But it does just, it's a little complex for people who are new to this. So now we can start vertex snapping this. We're just rotating it until it's inside of here. Or better yet, we can grab this and make it a live surface. You'll want to turn these panels open until you have the one with the magnets. And we want to make this our live surface. So now, if I start snapping this, you'll notice it'll snap to anywhere on here rather than just the verts. You might notice some problems like that. So maybe you do need to let this be a little smaller or less inside of, or less, what's the word I'm looking for? Less extended below the origin of the object. So I'm going to duplicate it and change all its transforms back to here. And this version will actually delete these faces. And I will fill these holes to make the new ones. Actually, I don't need to fill it, because I forgot. These are going to be inside, so that's a waste of a face. So actually, I should, on these ones, go back and delete that face as well. If you want to see inside of this, you can go to Wireframe, and there's that face. Hit 5 to go back to not wireframe. Everyone following along? So this is starting to be a somewhat easier tree, right? Again, live surface is on, so it snaps very easily. And then it's just rotating it so it's inside.
What if we already made a tree?
That's totally fine. There are many, many ways to make a tree. I mean, if it looks good, who gives a crap? If it looks good, you win. Well, this is one way that, we're not dealing with any parenting stuff, and you'll notice that we are actually able to get a pretty decent tree pretty fast. It's very hard to let go of this idea in 3D that the computer is our friend, and perhaps we can always algorithmically do things so that the computer is determining where these are rather than us. And in Blender, I showed you that I prefer using the sapling modifier, but I actually like using hair simulation to make trees. So I'd have this be a tree where it has very few hairs. Feels pretty tree-like, right? And we didn't have to deal with any hierarchy and stuff. That's why I like that method. So now we're going to do something else. We're going to select all of these branch objects. I'm going to duplicate them and move them to a new layer. Move these old ones to the original branches layer. Okay. So this is going to be the layer where we collapse this. And then we're going to eventually end up with a mesh that we're going to use as our new live object to distribute these foliage chunks on. Again, you know, the don't repeat yourself in me kind of balks at this method because it makes me, I want to be able to do this by a panel over here, but this is totally acceptable. Oh, and I have to turn off live object if I want to do this. So this is going to be the one where we collapse this into one super mesh. So I'm going to grab all these and go mesh combine. And now these are one object. Oop. I combined while it was off center, so I can try and get it back to the center with modify reset transforms. So now it has clean transforms and it's in the middle of the scene. And now I could start trying to distribute these. These are varying levels of detail. When you have a really low poly tree, you can even use the straight face. I don't want to do that when it's something a little more complex. I'll use this like Weeping Willow one. And the main thing is try to make sure that this origin of the object, it's so sucky that you have to get used to these, but it is really key. That's going to be the place that is the origin, so that when we start snapping this to the live object, it's very easy. We'll do this on here. I'll duplicate over here. And just translate, rotate, scale. You do want to be careful about something, which is these sort of intersections actually do, they are inevitable and you have to be comfortable with them as an organic part of modeling, but try to avoid them like being massively everywhere, because what happens is there's draw errors where it's not sure, because of the transparency, what's in front and what's behind, and it doesn't actually look good. So if you have transparency representing this as a 3D shape and you can see a plane intersecting through that transparency, it ends up feeling not really great. There's one thing I should do before I continue, which is actually look at my UVs. Window, UV texture editor. So I think these UVs ended up good because I started off from a default object. So it's just a plane and I added some subdivisions. So it started off with good UVs to begin with. But if you're going to be cloning multiples of these, you don't want to clone 50 of them, place them nicely, and then have to unwrap 50 of them. You want to unwrap once and then clone 50 times. Yeah. Oh, it's so nice and organic. Happy trees. There we're starting to get some problems. You know, or somebody should call me out on call my bullshit on my little Gamergate rant. Not that I'm wrong, but at the beginning of the quarter, if you remember, I did have a counter rant where I said, it's a waste of your time, you should be doing more art rather than talking politics. Politics is dumb. Do more art.
Oscar, so yesterday in let's see, Matt's animation class, we were talking about something, and someone mentioned libido, I think it was.
He was talking about it.
Yeah, he was talking about it. And then what Max was like, oh yeah, Oscar said that's like not a thing. And Matt's like, what? That's totally a thing.
What's not a thing? Libido?
It's a thing, apparently.
Libido's a thing. What are they? Albedo?
Albedo.
Oh.
Albedo.
Libido? Isn't it?
Yeah.
Now that is Freudian. Albedo is a thing. It's just, you know, it's a thing that has a different name that's existed back in the day. And it's a new word for the same thing.
New word.
And maybe it's a little more mathematically mapped out to a thing. I mean, I read the Wikipedia on it, and it's a bunch of nonsense about, like, the North Pole reflecting all the light. And blah, blah, blah. Huh? No, I still think of it as local color. Just a fancy word for local color, but rendered more neatly. Alright, everyone's starting to get a tree like this. How you doing attached to the trunk? You might want to have two varieties of this. So maybe there's one that has less divisions, or perhaps let's make this so-called division. So perhaps this one is differing in that it starts to have more sunlight. Its branches start to have a bit of an upswing. Nope, got to turn off. So maybe it's more like this. And that's going to feel like a pine that is reaching up. Again, I'm not showing it because I'm a bad teacher, but there's some sort of amount of visual reference in my mind that I'm going for here, where trees actually do this. They have some branches, depending on the variety of tree, they might have more branches sweeping upward versus downward. Alright, so does this feel like a less painful way to model a tree? Okay, it's a little, yeah. It's so fun to go into every single button and turn on the bells and whistles, but it's not necessarily going to be the most efficient. And like, the classic example of this in 3D is cloth simulation. Everyone always thinks that cloth simulation is going to make for a fancier, better result. Cloth simulation means you take way more time for results that you could have just modeled and sculpted by hand. So, you know. Like I said, we're not going to do it yet, but my impression coming off of Project 1 is that you guys need to model faster. You got to be able to pump more assets out. So, although I'm not going to start it today, because I'm immediately handing this class off to a substitute pretty soon, but when I get back, I want to start doing speed modeling challenges at the start of every day. So that'll be a theme, and you only have like 30 minutes to model the whole thing.
Those things aren't marked, are they?
What?
You're not gonna
No, it's going to be practice for your mental health,
yeah, or deterioration.
or mental
So it's kind of like a
anguish.
brush.
Yeah. And like so at Seabug, I always try to keep Seabug as beginner friendly as possible because I want people to drink the Blender Kool-Aid, and it is hard coming to Blender for the first time. So very frequently, probably like a third of Seabugs we have an extremely beginner-oriented session. And the thing that is fun about that is I talk about like the bare bones things of like, here's how you make a cube, how do you scale a cube. It's not complex 3D at all. But it's really, really good for a lot of people who would otherwise be terrified of trying to get into this stuff, right? But the problem with that is a lot of beginners have not only no need for that, but if they've come to multiple Cbugs, they've heard this talk by me like 50 times. Just my beginner orientation. So what they end up doing instead is a speed modeling challenge during that time. So I'll announce a theme like robot underpants or snow people, and then they have to model it by the time I'm done with the beginner tutorial. But there's been some really fun results out of it. Ooh, that's a big one. You can see how the benefit of having this have a certain origin is really good, right? So if this was a pine tree, I might model this more specifically to have big ones here at the bottom and littler ones here at the top. Alright, that's feeling a little more tree-like, right? Again, I've talked about this a lot, but what I'm essentially doing here is not teaching you a different method of tree making. I'm actually throwing away my previous tree that I made, and I really cannot stress that enough, that you have to be comfortable with throwing away garbage work you make that's not worthy of viewership. If you can't be honest with yourself that it's garbage, you're not going to make better art. Now I'm going in and maybe hand modeling some of these, but not too many of them. Turn off that. I just wanted one that flares outward more. Blah, blah, blah. There's a tree. So let's consider some materials we might put on this. Again, we have this trunk. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to do one other thing, which is I wanted to talk about, again, looking at our old reference of the Unity objects. They made good trees, so why not seek out their knowledge, their wisdom that is mineable within those sweet, sweet polygon clusters of theirs. So you can open up Unity 5 and find that thing. In the meantime, let's also open up Photoshop. And we're going to start looking at how we might make a texture for this. Open nature. Crap, I skipped attendance. Did I just eyeball this now? Is it everyone except Eli? I think he told me I wasn't going to be here. attendance. Question of the day is, what is your internet homepage at home? Kim Cooper. Google?
What do you mean? Like my search?
Yeah, like no, like what's like when you open Chrome or Firefox, what's the first page that comes up automatically? Google?
So you usually look at something?
Seth? What's your homepage at home?
At Google.
Google? Emily?
Google.
This is really interesting.
Carlos?
Google.
Brian? What's your internet homepage at home?
It's not Google though, it's Iron Gaming.
What's that?
Competitive, basically a huge competitive gaming site for you.
Alright. Matthew?
Google.
I'm not Google.
Amber?
I have to say.
You can say, if you want to say Google, you can say Google.
I have Firefox, so I have like
Babylon time.
the pins, you know? You can pin them.
Ah, the multiples.
So it's
Oh.
like Facebook, Gmail, Canvas, and
Alright. Brandon?
Google.
And Nathaniel? What's your homepage at home?
NVIDIA's
Yeah.
stereoscopic
I
site
noticed that.
that I use it to tweak the 3D on my glasses online.
Huh. Well, I think Nathaniel's the only one who actually got some semblance of this question right. All of you guys should have a website at home that forces you into passive, constant stimulation towards your greater purpose in life, creating 3D art. So it should be something like CG textures or CG talk, or perhaps game artisans.
What if those are all in your bookmarks and that's the first thing you go check?
It should be something that you see first thing so that you're forced to look at it.
That's a nice screensaver.
Something like this. Conceptart.org. So consider changing it to something that, you know, when you open it, first thing you see is something that makes you feel small inside and that you have to work harder. That there are giants out there who you should aspire to rather than, I don't know, Kim Kardashian's newest dress
Okay, that doesn't come up on Google.
or whatever. I don't know. Anyways, that's the question of the day.
Yeah, that's like.
So again, if we look at perhaps some of these objects, oh, I don't like the palm one. Speed tree. Let's look at the conifer. Conifer is fun. And we can turn to wireframe to try and cheat this. We can start trying to see what they're doing. So they actually have many, many cards. And they're sort of adding enough that it confuses you out of that draw error. But they're all sort of following this principal idea. So perhaps that's something you should try doing, is, you know, on these. Any given one of these might be shift, right click, duplicate faces. A slight rotation down, slight scaling. I'm DVing to make sure that I rotate from the center thing.
So are you now completely contradicting what you were saying earlier?
So now I am being contradictory, but it's one of those things where you're gonna see the problem, and it's a matter of you can only learn this by doing it. So do it. So let's try throwing a texture on here and see what it looks like. Maya has poorer draw modes than Unity, so perhaps we will discover this problem. I'm not sure how they organize this. Yeah, so they have the whole tree as a single object, although separate for LED. So again, I'm going to use the stupid, cheap way of making a texture.
The leaves, you didn't explain how to unwrap, did you? The leaves?
So when you create these default objects, sometimes they have polygons created already, or UVs created. So when you look at this, if you even go into the polyplane, it has a create UVs tab, which actually says whether it's on or not. So when you do this, this plane is already unwrapped for you. And the benefit of this is that it cuts out a lot of your work. The downside is that when you go in and start modifying it, you have to be careful because some things respect UVs and other things don't. So for instance, if I multi-cut and I hold Control and Shift to snap, I just added a cut. And let's look at what happens in the UV texture editor as I do these things. So that added something. What if I add one here, and one here? All these are adding these cuts correctly. But let's say if I grab these and merge them, what's that going to do? What?
They have to be are you trying to merge the works?
Yeah.
Usually they have to be close enough to each other.
Merge components to center. So this might show you one thing immediately, which is I was oriented wrong, and I have to make sure that I'm thinking about this as an object over here. So now I know that if I were to move this, and again, just to continuously stress snapping, if I want to get this point as the origin and I want it on this part of the grid, I'm going to hold D. While I'm in move mode, I can hold D and V to snap to that vertex, so that's where I'm going to move all these. And then I can hold D and X and move them, not D and X, D, V. And then I can hold X and snap all these to this object origin here. So some things will collapse UVs in a way that is not what you want. For instance, if I delete this face, and then fill it by grabbing two edges and fill the hole. Oh.
You have to have an even amount of selections, I think, to go all mile.
Oh, bridge. No? God, Maya sucks. It's the tool, not me. Classic excuse. Connect. Anyways, if you filled this somehow, when Maya 16 launches and they have that tool. Maybe this one will do it. So when you do that, sometimes eventually it will have problems where sometimes it creates weird UVs. But I don't know. The benefit is that you don't have to usually worry about this because they come created automatically.
It'd be hard to unwrap it.
Yeah, it's not a difficult one to unwrap. I think the trunk actually divides correctly too, but that's one where you might end up resetting it. So let's create a palm frond in the easy, lazy way, which is we're going to go to rendering, and we are going to use paint effects, which is the cheap, lazy person's way. Again, not because it's the best way, but because it comes out with a usable selection mask, or a usable alpha channel right off the bat. So that's what I like about it, compared to going out and grabbing a frond and manually manually photographing it? I mean, again, how many of you have cameras?
I mean,
I don't have.
You have a phone, but
I do have a
that's
camera,
about it.
it's decent.
Pretty good camera.
You have it with you?
But
No. I don't take pictures.
I mean, the thing is, you can't always just go shoot reference. So you should be comfortable with finding workarounds, or even painting this stuff by hand. So I'm going to go into something like plants. No. There we are. I think under tree mesh, there's a redwood sapling. Let's try that. I'm just going to do one. I don't really care about it, so I will immediately, under the rendering panel, not rendering, paint effects panel, click on this to turn the mesh into a 3D object. Try rendering it, see what it looks like. Actually, even better than that. Let's cut it down to only the thing we want, which is a little selection like this. So I will right click, invert selection, and delete. I'll grab one face and shift period to grow my selection, or caret right. Same thing, right click, invert selection, delete. So this is basically the start of a mesh. Now if you want to be fancier, you can go into Paint Effects and modify this beforehand. What does it look like? Does it look dumb? It looks super dumb. I'm going to try a different one. Again, the visor, your Paint Effects. Pine.mel here, I think is one pine branch. And then we can go in. You could also modify this beforehand to try and make something that was a little more luscious. So I could go into the pine attributes, and again, it's going to be under the tubes attribute. Tubes has the subtubes, which are going to be like your branches and your leaves and stuff. So you can go under growth and find the ones we want, which would be twigs and leaves. Twigs and leaves are more metaphorical than actual things. So the little green pine needles are our leaves, even though they don't look like it. They're just really thin leaves. But that's why Paint Effects can be used for certain other things. And I'm just going to increase their leaf length a little bit. It's a little fluffier. And again, convert this to a mesh. Let's try rendering that out. That looks a little better, right? Change this to mental ray because we're just not loaded even. Window, settings preferences. Plugin manager. Mental array. Because this is generating a texture, I'm fine spending the time on a render that's going to make a better result. We can actually try and make this start to follow this sort of nonsensical geometry I made up. So I'll, from this vantage point, just select a couple of those and some of these. Some of these. So I want these to follow the light path of my render a little more. Oh, pardon me. I was trying to move all these at once. So I was trying to maybe bend these so that it's more of a U shape. But whatever, we'll just go with the render for now. I do know that I want these two objects to be rotated like that a little more. Polygons, mesh, combine. This is essentially me doing a speed modeling challenge in class right now. I really am trying to think of solutions on the fly and just play around and understand that this is a little playground. If I was taking my time, I might start rotating all of these around. Actually, that's not too bad. If I select all these, I think one of the things connected to this is going to be those trunk objects. So if I continuously go around, maybe reduce this brush selection just a little bit. Try rotating it. It's not perfect, but from the side now it'll hopefully look like it's draping over that a little more. So now if I render this, oh yeah, I didn't turn it to my actual array. So I want this to be on mental ray. We're going to be lazy, so we're going to turn on just an indirect sun, or a physical sun and sky. Under our render settings, indirect lighting. That's going to take a long time. But we should start to get something that's pretty piney. And the thing I really want to show is click on alpha, so you understand the benefit of this as a means of getting alpha out of an object. Alpha. Let's zoom out a little more. So hopefully this, we can even kind of see it in the shot, hopefully this is going to descend over these decently.
Let's see, what could you use the alpha for?
So this is going to be a major part of how we affect this channel. I'm going to save this image as a ping. Ping because it's going to have the alpha channel in there. And you would think, well, you'd have this big rant about targas. Oscar, why are you doing that? Well, there is a specific reason for this, which is we're going to work on this to create a targa. But a ping is a good way to start off with. Again, my great reverence for file naming conventions and stuff like that. On the desktop, I'm going to open that. There we are. And I just want this little chunk here. It's like 256. We can actually paste this into that grass atlas I was starting to make. No, I don't want that. never mind, I want this to be, this will be our atlas for multiple trees, so I'll make it 512 by 512. Double click this, get rid of all this junk inside of there, and paste your tree in. And maybe even conform it. Again, not following best practices, but just trying to get this into some semblance of a starting square. So the next thing we're going to do is, normally what I would recommend using is something called Solidify by Flaming Pear. So if you look up Solidify Flaming Pear, it's one of the things in a giant pile of plugins that are all actually pretty good. But what Solidify does is, I think it's under older software, possibly in the free plugins. Move down the, it's in this plugin package, and what it does is it's going to pull alpha outward. So if you look at a Google image search for this, you can kind of see the way it works. If this was an alpha channel, it ends up yanking this out. And then this goes back to that thing I talked about of having your alpha channel be separate from your colors, so that your transparency doesn't end up being a white or black background because it doesn't have any color information to read. But we're going to do the lazy version of that, which is we'll select this. I'm going to this quick mask. I'm going to choke on it a little more. Under Q, I'll hit L and make this a little less blurry. And I will save that as an alpha channel. So this is going to be our alpha. Now back here on this layer, let's say we duplicated this. This is basically what Solidify is doing under the hood. Imagine you duplicate this and you duplicate it again, you duplicate it again. So it's nice and solid. And you merge all these. And then you went filter, blur, Gaussian blur on this lower one and duplicate it a bunch. Maybe have another one under here where I don't blur it quite as much. Or actually I can even do this, I mean, you know, it's okay to experiment. I can even smudge this out. So smudging this one under it to get these colors underneath is like a highlight channel. And you'll notice a problem here as I start smudging these out. They still have some sky color from that render there. So that's something we're going to want to try and get rid of. Create a layer under this, just fill it with pure green. Ew, look at all that sky color. So if I control click on this, it selects all the pixels that are not transparent here. I can say filter, I can hold control shift and I to invert. Actually just, I'm going to duplicate so I'm not destructive. Just delete this. And I'll also hit control H so I can see what I'm doing, which just hides your selection, it still exists. But now I can start deleting and you'll notice that it takes away that edging. So I'll save this as a targa. Which is going to store that alpha channel. Again, maybe don't save everything to the desktop like I do. Let's try getting this in here as an object. I'll just make it a Lambert. We don't want to mess with Lambert 1, so assign new material, or assign favorite material Lambert, sure. Under color, if I click this little attribute, takes a while to load. Wow. What you need? 10? Ooh. This one.
Usually.
Oh. Can I make these back? No. So now if I load that as my image, I'm gonna save it. Tree branch. Where did I save that? Treebranch.targa. I don't want to hit 6, so we're in textured mode. You'll notice that it automatically hooks that up with wireframe. And now we can start saying, oh man, this isn't right. I'm totally doing this wrong, but just dirty and fast. I mean, so now you can start saying down here. Again, not necessarily the best practice for clean UVs, but I want you to focus on speed right now more than cleanliness. I'd rather you shipped more. That's backwards. Make sense? Now you can do something cool like grab all of these crazy things. All these P-planes. Assign existing material, Lambert 2 with my great naming convention. And you'll notice this is why you unwrap first. Ah ha ha ha. That's fine. I can try using object replace, I think. Modify, replace object. There we go. So what that did is I selected all of these objects. I'm going to do it again. So this is my correct one. All of these ones are incorrect. So if this is the last object I select, the one that's correct is the last one. I can go modify, replace what is it? Replace object. It will then replace all the previously selected ones with the one good one. The other ones that suck. And hit G to duplicate. Now we can start figuring out whether we like this or not. I think one problem with it is we don't see any sort of detail coming off of here, so maybe that's something that I replace. And I'm not sure, but I think this now is Yeah, now these are instanced. Anyways, that's the alternative tree method, and I wanted to show it. Take a little break, and then I do want us to go outside and shoot a panorama.